Bariloche is called the north of the south, the gateway to Patagonia. I noticed the fresh, crisp air as soon as I stepped off the plane. The beauty of the land was undeniable. Snow-capped mountains were in the distance. Tall pine trees bordered glittering lakes. Charming alpine architecture decorated the town. In the early 20th century, there was a surge in Swiss immigration to this part of Argentina. Before the Swiss were German settlers, and before the Germans were the native indigenous people, whom I saw no signs of during my 2 weeks in Bariloche. On the way to my accommodation, my driver told me rideshare apps were illegal here, but people used them anyways because they needed the money, so I should always sit in the passenger seat instead of the back. Bariloche was a popular vacation destination for Argentinians. It was summertime at the moment and peak tourist season. It was also a ski destination during the winter and beautiful to visit all year round. I decided to stay outside the main town to avoid the crowds and traffic and booked a room in a little blue cottage a 10-minute walk from a beautiful lake. The house had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a trailer in the backyard. My host's name was Bruno, a local who lived in one of the bedrooms upstairs. The other bedroom was occupied by a married couple from Buenos Aires. The cottage was very old, with groaning wooden floors, flimsy walls, and whining pipes. The 2 bathrooms didn't have locks, which I learned one morning after accidentally walking in on a man using the toilet. The man's name was Vincent. He stayed in the trailer in the backyard. Vincent was American and grew up in Alabama. He was 52 years old, traveled all over the United States and some parts of Europe, but was completely new to Latin America. I asked if he preferred Vincent or Vince. He replied, his family called him Vince, but he preferred women to call him Vincent. He said women instead of everyone else. Interesting. One evening, we all decided to have a barbecue. Vincent was excited because he heard so much about the famous Argentinian Asado, but had yet to experience it. We had chorizo, blood sausage, pork loin, ground beef patties, rib-eye steaks, and potato salad. It was all delicious. The only thing I didn't like was the blood sausage, which had a mushy texture I found unappetizing. There were no vegetables. Bruno said he sometimes had a green salad with the meat, but potato salad was more delicious. Of course, there was also red wine and beer. Vincent never heard of Malbec before, but he liked it. He was shocked that a few dollars could buy a bottle of wine that had a cork in it. In the United States, wine that cheap came in a box. I noticed the Argentinians at the table ate the burger patties with a knife and fork. There were hamburger buns, but no one used them. Vincent didn't want to fill up on burgers when there were ribeye steaks cooking on the grill outside. I focused on the chorizo. I used to have an Argentinian boyfriend back when I lived in Mexico City. He mentioned there was a sequence of meats during barbecues. Sausage was usually an appetizer, then short ribs, then tougher cuts of beef like flank steak. The main course was usually the better cuts of meat like ribeye or tenderloin. Vincent made an unfortunate blunder at the dinner table. He knew the economy here was difficult, but I doubt he understood the extent of the crisis. Many foreigners, including myself, came to Argentina because our dollars or euros stretched further than they would in other countries. He exclaimed, "Everything is so cheap." This crude statement was followed by a few agonizing seconds of silence from the Argentinians at the table, who were too polite to say anything. I kept chewing my steak, feeling embarrassed at Vincent's naivete, and quickly changed the subject with a light-hearted Chinese anecdote using my mediocre Spanish. One time, while visiting family in northern China, my aunt cooked steaks for dinner as a reward for my teenage cousin's good exam scores. The meat came in colorful plastic packaging with cartoons and cooking instructions. My aunt and cousin enjoyed the meat, but I could tell from the first bite that whatever this was, wasn't beef. Maybe it was horse or donkey. My family members could not tell the difference. The Argentinians at the table thought this was very funny. Everyone warned us the lake was cold, but it didn't stop Vincent and I from taking a daily swim. During the first 5 minutes, we'd yell things like, "Why are we doing this to ourselves?" Or, "I think it was warmer yesterday." Then, after taking the plunge, we'd laugh and shout about how refreshing the icy water felt. The lake was unbelievably clean and clear. After about 20 or 30 minutes of swimming, we'd stumble back to shore and choose our respective rocks to sit and dry ourselves in the sun. With the scenic backdrop all around us, Vincent told me about his life. After serving the military for 8 years, he went to university on the GI Bill and graduated with a degree in horticulture, of all things. He immediately regretted his decision to join the military from the moment he stepped off the bus and people began yelling at him for no particular reason. His most dreaded exercise involved holding heavy steel-toed boots at arm's length for a grueling 45 minutes. The walls would be covered with condensation as minute by minute creeped along and sweat dripped down the new recruits' faces. If someone dropped their boots, their punishment was 100 push-ups. Vincent lamented he used to be able to do 100 push-ups with no problem. Even though his upper body looked quite strong, he said he wasn't as physically fit as he used to be. He was 52 years old, but looked 10 years older. He wore round prescription glasses, and his hair was completely white. Iceland was the most exotic place he was ever stationed, but unfortunately, he never saw the Northern Lights. After 8 years and 3 days, Vincent was discharged. He said back then the military was mostly men, and the 6 women he ever saw looked like his brother. As soon as he stepped foot on a university campus in Alabama and saw one beautiful girl after another, he said, "I'm not leaving." He almost got married once, but the girl changed her mind. She always knew exactly what she wanted: kids, a job working for a national radio network, and to have a house in Kansas to live near her family. He still took a peek on social media now and then to see how she was doing, hoping she got fat over the years. Unfortunately, she was still attractive, happily married to another man, and got everything she wanted in life. Vincent never quite knew what he wanted or where he was going. He spent the past 10 years traveling across the United States while learning the art of engraving. He had all the tools, including a microscope, but he didn't bring them to Argentina because they were too heavy. He got a jar filled with 2,000 nickels and engraved them all. After selling every last one, he bought a camper van in cash. He traveled the country with his dog, whom he found abandoned on the railroad tracks, and named him Doc. I asked what breed. Vincent responded, "Big and hairy." He said he gave Doc the best life an owner could give a dog, a life of driving through the country, going hiking or camping in national parks. He never traveled internationally when he had Doc, unable to bring himself to give him away, since he knew no dog owner would be as good as he was. He couldn't bear to take him on a plane either and allow Doc to suffer long, cramped air travel in a cage. After his beloved companion died, Vincent decided to fly to Argentina and start seeing the world. He originally wanted to go to Vietnam because it was cheap, safe, the people were friendly, and the women were attractive. But the visa website kept rejecting his application, so he came to Argentina instead, which was visa-free for Americans. Vincent once lived on the Lakota reservation out of curiosity. The nature was stunning, but the alcoholism, depression, and abuse of the locals was heartbreaking. Then he drove to Arizona after hearing about a woman who was also living in a camper van and looking after 150 stray dogs. Being a dog lover himself, he decided to go find her and see if he could help. She turned out to be insane and made it viciously clear she didn't want his help. Vincent decided to park his camper van somewhere else and volunteer at the local dog shelter instead, where the staff was much more welcoming. The crazy lady stopped her canine altruism after collecting $38,000 in donations. She immediately abandoned the stray dogs and moved somewhere else. Vincent stayed for a while longer and then drove his camper van to Yosemite. It was winter at the time, which is usually the season people avoided Yosemite, but he went because it sounded cool. He didn't like cities. He said Buenos Aires was a forest of concrete, and Bariloche was paradise. Nowadays, the woods of Oregon weren't safe to park his camper van anymore. Drug addicts would break in and rob the car as soon as he stepped out for a hike. He met plenty of homeless people on the road, often seeking their company out of curiosity. But he always went armed with a gun and never went with them to dark, lonely alleyways. He just wanted to hear their stories. Some of them were mentally ill. Some had drug and alcohol addictions. Some were just down on their luck, living from meager paycheck to meager paycheck, no savings when rent was due, and getting kicked out by their landlord if they got fired or laid off. Vincent slept with a screwdriver under his pillow when he traveled in his camper van. Certain areas had unstable characters roaming around, and a screwdriver was an excellent weapon. He also had a bottle opener on his keychain. That was also good. Luckily, he never had to use it. Vincent and I had a routine. He'd make us breakfast, toast with butter and jam, eggs, a few slices of avocado, a slice of tomato, and a handful of cherries. I'm used to eating oatmeal for breakfast, so this was a refreshing change. I didn't grow up eating much toast, butter, or jam, but I must say, this combination is delightful. Vincent had a system for eating, always saving the cherries for last, so he could end on a sweet note. He said it felt wrong to eat the avocado last. After breakfast, we'd take a 20-minute walk to the cafe for coffee and something sweet. Vincent would ask for an extra large café con leche with a slice of cake. I'd order a cappuccino and a media luna. The large coffee cup he wanted was the size of a soup bowl. The baristas actually kept them stored in a cabinet. But when Vincent saw the size, he asked them to please serve the coffee in the largest cup they had, not the delicate little ones that made him want to stick his pinky finger up. Vincent drank his enormous coffee with astonishing speed, then ordered a second cup, while I continued to slowly sip my normal-sized cappuccino. Afterwards, we'd head to the lake, often stopping at the fruit stand to pick up some cherries or strawberries, which were in season. Vincent was paranoid. He was torn between leaving his valuables in his trailer or taking them with him in his backpack. Someone could break into the trailer and rob him, but they could also rob him while he swam in the lake. He kept his passport and cash in a waterproof box. It looked like a crayon box. Before going swimming, he'd leave his backpack in plain sight, but hide the box in the bushes. Now and then, sunbathers walked past our belongings, and his eyes glued to their every move as they looked for a place to set up their picnic. After our swim, we'd head back to the house and stop by the grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner. Vincent loved getting ribeye steaks from the butcher. In the United States, they were over $20 a pound. Here in Bariloche, they were $5 a pound. To him, that was basically free. He was shocked at the cheap price of food, housing, and transportation made possible by having US dollars. Even though he had no debt, he realized he could never afford retiring in the United States. He said he could easily live here on $50 a day. If he could get his engraving tools and figure out how to mail his art to his clients back in the States, he'd move to Argentina in a heartbeat. He'd spend the warmer months in Bariloche and the colder months in Mendoza, avoiding all cities. Vincent engraved and auctioned something called hobo nickels, a term I'd never heard before. They were tiny art pieces that originated in the Great Depression. Migrant workers traded them for food, drink, or lodging. The complexity of the engraving increased the nickel's value and made it into a one-of-a-kind collectible. Vincent built a following over the years in this niche. He said his skill as an engraver was decent, but people were actually more interested in his life on the road and purchased his art because they liked him. This made me pause for a second. I wonder if people would be interested in my life on the road and the stories I have from my travels around the world. I couldn't tell if Vincent regretted not getting married. He pointed out that if he had, then he wouldn't have the amazing experiences of life as a wandering artist. He had a former girlfriend who was gorgeous, very sexual, and impressively flexible since she was a yoga teacher. He hoped true love would blossom and even taught her how to engrave. Unfortunately, they weren't compatible, and over time, he discovered she was not a good person. Out of spite, she stole his engraving tools when he broke up with her. Vincent didn't even care. He just wanted her out of his life. He could always buy new tools. I told him I did yoga, and he looked at me pointedly and said, "All women who do yoga are crazy." Then he followed up with, "All women are crazy. You guys have those hormones." Since he brought up female hormones, I decided it was appropriate to bring up male hormones, which in my opinion are far more frightening. I mentioned this along with a few statistics. He nodded slowly, and we never discussed yoga again. One evening, while sitting by the fire in the backyard, he remarked he could smell a pear tree. I asked him what a pear tree smelled like. He replied, "Semen." His eyes lingered on my face to see my reaction. Vincent told me about a friend who went to veterinary school and graduated with a mountain of student debt. He and his wife earned 2 incomes to pay for their house, but when they divorced, he was on his own to cover the mortgage, his student loans, and car payments. He didn't want to lose his house, so he got rid of his car and drove a scooter instead. He ate rice and lentils for 5 years straight. He had a small vegetable garden, so he could add some flavor to his meals, but for the most part, he accepted the food he ate would be bland for a long time. 5 years later, he was debt-free. Vincent left the state of Alabama after getting arrested for driving with a suspended license. He spent 2 nights in jail and paid a $500 fine. In those 2 nights, he discovered many of the inmates were caught in a cycle of driving with a suspended license, fined, released, and thrown back in jail the next week for driving with a suspended license to get to work so they could pay for the fine. Vincent claimed that was how property taxes stayed so low in Alabama, taking money from the poor. Once he understood what was going on, he paid his fine, got back into his car with his suspended license, and drove for the state border. They weren't going to trap him in that cycle if he could help it. Vincent detested people who flipped houses. Sure, they made a profit, but they also increased property taxes, making the area too expensive for everyone else, and pushing locals out. He also despised billionaires, saying they were the root of the world's problems. He loved to teach locals in Bariloche how to engrave. They could sell their art to Americans, which meant they were connected to the American economy. He'd teach them just enough so they could make some money, but not too much so they could leave him and become his competition. He wished he could move around the world without dealing with visas. He didn't like that immigrants could come into the United States undocumented. He said he'd gladly trade half the American population for Mexicans if they were documented. It didn't sit well with him that anyone could hop over the border and make a life in the United States when he had to deal with visa applications and immigration policies if he wanted to move to another country. Sometimes, Vincent wondered if he should have stayed in the military for the full 20 years so he could collect the retirement check for the rest of his life. He claimed he inherited his business sense from his parents in that he had none. His mother was on what Vincent called the blue and shiny plan. She loved anything blue and shiny, especially cars. She'd buy the nicest cars and drive them until the wheels fell off. His father raised border collies and sold them for $1,200 each, but the venture never turned enough profit. His brother was a drug addict who claimed to be clean for the past 3 years, but Vincent didn't speak to him anymore. He was the closest to his grandmother, who was the sweetest woman who ever lived. She grew up during the Great Depression and could make a delicious and filling meal out of anything she found in the pantry. After living with so little, the simplest things in life were a treat. She considered a chocolate bar from the convenience store to be extravagant. Unfortunately, she married an abusive alcoholic. They divorced, but reunited years later when Vincent's grandfather got sick. He died shortly after the reconciliation. Vincent's favorite book was East of Eden by John Steinbeck. The story takes place in California's Salinas Valley and follows the Trask family across multiple generations, exploring the complexities of family, identity, and the fight between light and darkness within us all. I read this book last year, but I preferred The Grapes of Wrath. The story is set at the Dust Bowl, where the Joad family drives from Oklahoma to California in search of work. The westward trek reveals brutal truths of migrant life, but the family endures with hope. Vincent didn't like The Grapes of Wrath because it was too real and too cruel. I enjoy reading about the cruelty because it's honest. I think it's horrible when a writer glazes over the harshness of life. It doesn't do the characters justice. Vincent and I spent a lot of time together. After a while, it was clear he wanted to be more than friends. He told me I was beautiful and pleasant to be around, and invited me to live with him for the rest of his stay in Patagonia. In Argentina, he could afford to live comfortably, so he could also support a girlfriend. I think men should take care of women, he said, with a hopeful smile. His camper van was in Alabama, along with his engraving tools. His plan was to return to the United States, get to work on his engravings, and sell his art. He'd drive across the country, live cheaply in his camper, and save up money to finance a trip to Southeast Asia next year. He said I should join him. He'd take care of me. A friend of mine once told me not to be friendly with men I have no interest in dating. Leading them on is unkind. But Vincent and I were both American solo travelers who lived in the same house in this foreign country. Should I have remained cold and reserved? Should I have gone to the lake alone every day, when I was actually glad to have his company in this unfamiliar place and listen to his fascinating life story? Vincent left Bariloche and went further south in Patagonia. I hope he's found love and companionship. I appreciated his offer to take care of me, but I had to refuse. He wasn't the right man for me. Perhaps I'll get a similar offer someday. If the man is right, I'll accept. That's the way it should be, shouldn't it? You never know who you'll meet next. Before I arrived in Argentina, I spent 2 months in Peru, where I met dozens of intriguing new people. Some of them were pleasant, others not so much. Find out about my daily life in Cusco in this video, where I meet a German entrepreneur, an American English teacher, and a Canadian ex-farmer.